much. Yes, I hope everybody joins the Burleigh Society. He was truly a remarkable figure. Just sort of en passant, I came across an article on Burleigh that didn't mention his name at all. And I came across it in the Louisville Courier-Journal. And it's sort of an insight into this period. It's known that Burleigh was the first black soloist at St. George's on 16th Street and Stuyvesant Square. And that it was a very difficult situation. Burleigh at first was asked to audition, but then was worried that he would immediately be discounted. So it was a blind audition where no one could see him. And then dramatically, the deciding vote in his favor was cast by J.P. Morgan, who wasn't always known for such progressive sentiments in other areas. But what I found was an article in the Louisville Courier-Journal by somebody who thought he was the leading candidate for this position, who was bitching and moaning. And he just incredulously, he could not believe that the position had been given to an African American. And there was an article in the Louisville Courier-Journal just about his sense of incredulity. But at the end, as unpleasant as some of it was, he said at the end, well, I had to say that when I heard him sing, I realized he was the best of all. The thing about the harmonies, I think it's tricky. I mean, Burleigh himself said that it was Dvorak who suggested to him doing these kinds of settings. And you know, the opening of the New World Symphony is a kind of example. I mean, the large, that kind of thing. Even, you know, those kinds of raised intervals in Dvorak, I think. But the thing I like the most is I believe that Dvorak's concept of swing low came from Burleigh. But then years later, when Burleigh did an arrangement of it, I think he quoted Dvorak in his arrangement. So I think that's kind of a certain kind of collaboration. And you know, we've already raised the issue then of how, no matter what we think of them in relation to their own time, how we view their efforts today and how we view our own writing about them and the kinds of things we've done. And I asked one of our fine graduate students, Marcus Pyle, who's going to be writing his dissertation, alas not on Dvorak, but on Salome, to speak to some of these issues that we've raised. So let me ask you to give him a very warm welcome.
Thank you. So I come to this panel as the resident skeptic, not in the spirit of petulance, but in order to critically address some of the confounding issues surrounding Dvorak's affinity with black music. We're presented with a symphony that is at the center of a messy matrix of socio-political politics, debates of aesthetics, issues of class, and morphing ideologies of what it means to be human, yet alone American. The vast majority of ink dedicated to Dvorak's relationship to this newfound musical style has been told from a certain distance, a stance that views Dvorak as the champion of an overlooked minority. However, what we should consider today is that the story might not be as straightforward as it seems. What are the underlying implicit assumptions in the act of translating black sentiment into Western art music, and at what costs? Dvorak comes to us as a figure who has been ventriloquized and immortalized through a very specific narrative of positive appropriation, as Mike said earlier, told by a very specific audience of largely white male music critics and journalists or students who, for better or worse, were indebted to him. Perhaps at this point, I should say that I'm not against Dr. Dvorak at all, and my personal appraisal of his actions is neither here nor there. I merely want to raise questions that extend to and have currency in today's social climate, questions that ask how Dvorak plays in the New World Initiative of the New York Philharmonic, for example, and in a more abstract sense, we can enact a discussion of what sonically constitutes a racialized body. What did Dvorak mean when he referred to Negro melodies? What are the implications of Dvorak's orchestration in the context of what it means to be American? What are the conditions of possibility that even led to humanness being read onto Negro music? And in the spirit of bringing this question into politics of the present, we should question whether Dvorak's New World Initiative had lasting consequences, negative or positive, for Black composers and musicians. Therefore, I hope that this conversation unsettles the legend of the New World Symphony in order to raise a certain consciousness in us as patrons of the arts. Should I discuss some of the things that I might want to bring up?
I'm waiting.
Okay. Good. So, maybe this should take a seat. Not so critical.
Okay, good.
We can just offer it up to the panel at large. My first question is, what does Dvorak mean when he lauds Negro melodies? And when he says Black music, what does he mean by music? Does he mean the timbre of the sonic Black voice, which we can deconstruct a little bit later, melody, and the specific characteristics that Mike pointed out to you at the piano, excessive expression? Some of these characteristic traits indexical of Black music are not essential to Black music or Black bodies. So, can you hear Blackness in a voice is a question that has been taken up by Nina Eidstein and others, and the answer is largely no, you cannot. What you're hearing is a matrix of cultural indexes that you have been primed to understand as Black. So how did that fit into Dvorak's appropriation or appreciation of Black music? The pentatonic scale, the flat seventh scale degree, and syncopation that Mike played for you on the piano are not essential to Black music at all. In fact, syncopation and the Scotch snap, it's called the Scotch snap, so it's prevalent in Scottish music, Hungarian, English music, as well as African American and Plains Indian musics. In any case, the larger question the larger issue is that all of these traits are somewhat associated with exoticism or folksiness to some extent. And so we need to look at how Dvorak thought about the African American and Plains Indian, and did he exoticize them, and what are the repercussions of that? Was Dvorak describing some kind of differential, essentialized, or racialized sonic Blackness? So the voice that presents itself as Black. I mean, he's coming from a specific point in time, and we didn't have philosophies of the voice such as Nina Eidstein and Mark M. Smith in his book, How Race is Made, Slavery, Segregation, and the Census, which I urge you to read. It's a very good book, actually. But there was this kind of epistemic idea that the Black body was physically different from the white body biologically. It was differential biologically. And that's evidenced by the idea that Black voices possessed the, quote, sharpness or harshness that the white man's has not. And so largely people of this time were latching onto that as something that was kind of a novelty, something that I guess we could just see as different and interesting, peculiar, as Maurice.
It's not my word, but you read it all the time. You
Yes,
see it all
you
through
do.
history.
You do, definitely. And then I think we could also talk about the epistemic shift from the soulless Black body that was used a lot in the rationalization of slavery. We see it kind of animalization of Black bodies, and then there is this shift. The abolitionists started to read soul into Black music and use that as kind of a rallying cry for anti-slavery rhetorics. So the fact that they possess some kind of soul and they are being humanized. So Dvorak is coming into a very interesting political and historical moment, kind of post-Reconstruction era, where maybe some of this liberal guilt is still playing out. And we also have a divided United States. So the question of what it means to be American is much deeper than the symphony, I think. So I think we can also talk about cultural hybridity a little bit. What Dvorak heard, or may have heard, there was actually a misconception that Dvorak, in referring to black music, was referring to Stephen Foster songs, which were already once, if not more, removed from actual black music. So the other thing to unsettle that is that minstrel vocal style was very similar to bel canto style. I have a quote from W.J. Henderson from the New York Times of 1893, who says, "In spite of all assertions to the contrary, the plantation songs of the American Negro possess a striking individuality. No matter whence their germs came, they have in their growth been subjected to local influences which have made them a new species. That species is the direct result of causes climactic and political, but never anything else than American. Our South is ours. Its twin does not exist. Our system of slavery, with all its domestic and racial conditions, was ours, and its twin never existed. Out of the heart of this slavery arose the spontaneous musical utterance of a people. That folk music struck an answering note in the American heart. If those songs are not national, then there's no such thing as national music." So that quote's a little bit interesting in and of itself. And that it brings up another point that I would like to talk about a little bit later, is that black music in and of itself is not seen as great. It's seen with the masterful stroke of a Western classical orchestrator. It's seen as great. It has the potential for greatness. It's just raw material. And then we have another quote by Jacob Smith from his book, Vocal Tracks, Performance in Sound Media, that minstrel troops such as the Ethiopian serenaders sought the respectability of high culture. And he has argued that William Howland Kinney's recorded music in American life has argued that folk material was sung with an operatic approach because of the prominence of European classical music on the phonograph market. Related to this, we recall that black voices, because of the sharpness and harshness that the white man's has not, as I mentioned earlier, were thought to be better suited for recording. So what we're seeing here is that there's an interplay between cultural traditions, and there's an underlying assumption that their music, in the argument that we should adopt it as an American music, there's the argument that, well, we should adopt it because we've influenced it a lot, and it has some resonances that we gave it. It's not great on its own. We gave it some of its greatness, and so yes, now we can rationally accept it as music that we can put forth. So, I mean, we can maybe discuss some of that.
I'm ready to attack. You know, I appreciate.
Bring the mic.
I'm sorry. I appreciate your seeing in this story another way of explaining. I want to go to the voice for a second. When you're talking to a performer, I'm working with Mercer Ellington, and we're doing Queenie Pie of Ellington. And he hires a librettist who would work for who wrote Blue Suede Shoes. You know that Elvis. This librettist, this songwriter, had worked for Elvis. And so he sends us some lyrics, and we're supposed to attach them to already existing tunes of Duke's. That was my job, actually. And I said to Mercer, I said, these are very white lyrics. And he said, not when they come out of a black mouth. And I thought that was very insightful. I've also recently heard a recording of excerpts from Porgy and Bess by two extraordinary white singers, American operatic singers, and they have, by now, after a long time of incubation, they have learned to catch, to repeat, to reproduce the black vernacular just the way they can reproduce the Italian vernacular or the French vernacular or the Czech vernacular. Singers can do that. There's no question that there was at a time, I'm not saying it still exists, but there was certainly at a time, I think it exists in certain ways still, there was at a time a clear cultural uniqueness in the voice of black singers. And I've experienced it personally again and again in my lifetime as a performer. And yes, I repeat, I have since heard wonderful performances of Porgy, which technically or theoretically was supposed to only be sung by black singers according to, there's no contract that says that, but that's been the tradition about Porgy and Bess. So I have to challenge that question that there's no such thing as a black voice. There are dozens of examples where great singers have said to young black singers, and I had one experience when we did the Clef Club, young black singers, you know, you're kind of cleaning this up, you're making it more European sounding. And yes, there are recordings from the period that sound European style, and Burleigh himself sang in a European style. But there is next to that this whole cultural presence which you cannot erase. It's too strong, it's too powerful, it's too overpowering to try to put this, to try to get rid of this, or to say, well, that's very nice, but we're all the same. We're not all the same. We have cultural things. There are certain voices, certain phrases in Yiddish music that appeal to me. It's because my mother sang these phrases. I smell them right away. I sense them immediately. And I understand and identify with them. And I think that's true in black culture.
Maybe you want to respond?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
I'm just talking voice now. I have other questions to ask, but that one in particular.
I think.
You quoted 2 books about it, yeah.
Yes. I think when I'm referencing the voice, there's the voice as, well, this is tricky. Okay, there's the voice as a metaphor, and then there's the voice as this kind of sonic fluid that's coming from one's body. When I was saying that there is no such thing as an essentialized black voice, what I'm referencing is the fact that taken outside of a body, if you just had pure voice coming at you, you would be unable to distinguish whether the person singing was of a certain race or not. I think it's true that Dvorak was responding to certain cultural markers in voice. So, and we do have black vernacular and all of these things, but those are indexes of a specific culture.
If only we knew what Dvorak thought about it. Oh, wait! I found an article recently that I hadn't known about at all in the Lafayette, Louisiana Advertiser, and it's called Rich and Soft Voices. It's rather scarily titled Experiments with Colored Boys and Girls by Dr. Anthony Dvorak, but goes on a little bit less scarily. Let me read you some of it. Dr. Anthony Dvorak, director of the National Conservatory of Music of America, has become deeply interested in the cultivation of the Negro voice. For several months past, he has conducted a class of colored boys and girls with the object of not only teaching them the elementary principles of music, but studying the range, the power, and the possibilities of their voices. His pupils have entered enthusiastically into the spirit of the work, and if a critical listener may find fault with the technique or the art of their choruses, he could find nothing to criticize in the vim and the intelligence of their singing. When asked how he succeeded thus far and what observations he had made, Dr. Dvorak said, even the short term of tuition that we have given colored pupils entitles us to express a favorable opinion of their possibilities. In general, they have rich and soft, natural voices. The cultivation of their voices, however, has been of such a short period as compared with that of the whites, that it's impossible to say accurately what will we be able to bring them to. We can only judge by their present status, that is, their natural voice and temperament. But I think we have a right to expect excellent results. It does not require voice and ear only to sing well, but a necessary requisite is the sanguine temperament and the vivid, easily affected, and susceptible imagination. I have not noticed these qualities so much in the voices of the white pupils as in those of the colored ones. In volume, their voice is superior to that of the whites, and in timbre, it is equal, if not superior. Colored people have certainly every requisite to make good opera singers. And he goes on. So So this is Dvorak leaving this, what he, all kinds of things mixed together. And lest I be dishonest, too celebratory, I should add, and I don't know whether he's saying something here about black people or opera singers, you judge. He says, colored people have certainly every requisite to make good opera singers. Their fondness of show, their vanity, love of color, and mimicry make them natural actors. So they're in something which seems extremely progressive and extremely attractive is another kind of sentiment that is a bit more problematic, something to tease out.
Virgil Thompson said to me that he wanted an all-black chorus in his, what was his first opera? Saints, yeah. Four Saints and Three Acts. And I said, why did you use an all-black chorus? He said, well, there's something that happens when you put a large group of black people on stage. You have an instant community. You can't do that. So he says, that is something magical, and I wanted that in my opera. I mean, these cultural things are alive. Leontine Price is one of the great opera singers of our century, but when she wants to sing, unquote, black, she sure can. And you hear it, and she changes the way she sings. She changes the vowel sounds, the placement of the voice, of course, the diction. You can't take that away. I mean, that's something that exists or existed. And yes, that same group can do anything. Black singers can do anything, of course. No one questions that, but there is a culture that existed and still exists in pop music, there's no question. There's one more thing I wanted to say about voice. You think of Will Marion Cook and also James Reese Europe. They used to do dance bands, have dance bands with their string bands. They played violin, cello, banjo, mandolin, and they didn't just sit there and play these instruments. They sang as they played. The Clef Club that appeared in Carnegie Hall didn't have a choir. I had to bring a choir from Morgan State. The people in the Clef Club sang in 3 and 4 part harmony. Okay, so my theory is, it's only a theory, but the voice is very crucial to me, and the whole question of the perpetuation of a cultural thing, that since there was the singing in these early dance bands, Vernon and Irene Castle would dance to these bands. They had all black bands when they had these tea parties for the most high-end white people in New York. They taught them social dancing, but they had an all-black band led by James Reese Europe playing the mandolin, singing. What happened to these voices? I thought to myself and thought to myself and thought to myself. Duke Ellington's earliest band, 1923, 24, had fiddle, had guitar, had banjo, had bass, the 3 string players, and he had 3 saxophones. And I thought to myself, what other instruments can bend? Only single reed instruments. Why do we tune to the oboe? Because it's a double reed and it's kind of frozen. When it plays A, it's going to be the same note all the time, 80% of the time. The oboe is not a flexible instrument. You can't bend notes. And this is a singing style, black singing style, which involved a great many bend notes. In fact, Dvorak said to Burleigh, is that how they sang? Because the note wasn't exactly a flat seventh. It was a little more than, it was flatter than the flat seventh.
Ellie, did you want to?
No, I'm sorry, I'll finish right away. So my thinking is that the saxophone and the clarinet can imitate the human voice. It can bend, it can slide up to a note, it can bend a note, it can sharpen a note. It has this facility. And that's the reason that it actually ended up in the jazz bands. I'm sorry, okay, I'm finished.
Well, learning more about Lorraine Hunt Lieberson when they found this incredible recording, I had not known she was trained as a violist and didn't actually become a vocalist until she was in her 30s. So she just grew up with a very musical family and was a string player and sort of did voice on the side for fun. But I'm bringing her up because some of the reviews talk about the viola quality of her voice. So she was able to project an identity, I think, which was pretty specific and which people picked up. So just thinking about Maurice's comment about Leontyne Price, and I think part of what Marcus is bringing up is voice as a performance and race as a performance and gender as a performance. So Leontyne Price could sing in like black vernacular style. Certainly she was very adept at that. Kathleen Battle, I imagine, and a number of people. Yeah, but in terms of performance of markers that might be identified with race, I think that the point that's being brought up is about not essentialized identities, but having an aspect that can be turned on or turned off. Is that correct?
Yes.
It's cultural.
Yes.
Yeah. It's cultural.
I'd like to raise this other issue because I think we'd like to get some questions from the audience. And but this is this issue of what could loosely be called appropriation, but is more subtle than that word allows us to speak about. You know, one of the things that I find so striking when I look at people like Dvorak and Burleigh and Mildred Hill, who was one of the people who was quite influential in Dvorak's understanding of what black music was, that we live in such a world where even simply decent behavior seems horrific. That, I mean, people simply behaving as decent human beings seems to make them stand out as heroes, and there's something sort of shameful about that. That again, just simple decency is that. But I'm thinking about how we, from a broader sense, look at people. I mean, I'll start with Mildred Hill, but we'll go to Dvorak. Mildred Hill, as I've written about, compiled her song "Happy Birthday" through the study of African American street cries in Louisville. Mildred may or may not have done it, quote unquote, to make money, but we all know how much money that song made. All that money went to white people, and none of the African American street criers got any of it. Dvorak was brought here at a princely salary to create American music. He drew on the music of African Americans. He got paid his princely salary and went back, and nobody else got any money. Well, that doesn't talk about Dvorak's inner decency or what kind of human being he was, but what about the larger sense of how we view this kind of appropriation? You know, we could want to idealize it by saying, well, Dvorak borrowed from Burleigh and Burleigh borrowed from Dvorak, it's an even deal. But maybe it isn't an even deal. I'm just curious what kinds of responses you have. How should we, I mean, this is, 2017. How might we think of these kinds of borrowings? Are they as innocent as we think they are? Are they something to simply heap praise on, or are they something we have to preserve with a certain kind of tension that's not easily resolvable?
I'd like to offer an appropriation story. Okay, I worked with Leonard for 7 years, one-on-one. I did orchestrations for him. And we worked particularly on Queenie Pyle, although I did an orchestration of Black, Brown, and Beige, or portions of it. He gave me $1,000. It's always $1,000. I'm a gun for hire. I do this. I'm happy to have it happen.
He's getting paid that for this panel.
Yeah, I know. And so, my first job out of college was with Mills Music. And I was on the second floor doing work with the people who printed the music, and I realized after a while I was one of the few people in that building, on that floor, who could read music. Irving Mills was the president of the Mills Music Company at the time, and you see his name, and I said to Duke, thinking I would gain some plus. Who's this guy, Irving Mills, has got his name all over your music? Okay, Jewish guy, I'm Jewish. I don't want the appropriation, but I'm accusing appropriation. Duke said, no, Maurice, you got it wrong. I sold him as many dogs as winners. And at the end of the week, if I didn't have money for the band, he came up with a check. who's appropriating whom? Who's working whom in that relationship? The same with Louis Armstrong, who writes in his biography, your other special articles, about you've got to find a smart white lawyer to protect you so you can just concentrate on your music making. Who's appropriating who? Who's the hip cat in this relationship? So I'm a little careful about, of course it's appropriation, we know that. And of course you can never pay back people giving us this rich culture, which is so part of us, such a huge part of us. And many of them didn't profit from it, but not today. Not today. Black musicians today, or black kinds of musicians, I'm thinking Beyonce and so forth, they benefit very well. They make big money. I mean big money. They're smart, they got. So I think it's about culture. I think at the end it's about culture. And that's all I have to say. I'm sorry. I want us to hear not swing along, but the opening piece from the Clef Club concert that was played in Carnegie Hall in 1912. If you could have that picture that we had up the very first slide, and if you would play and this is, here we have the Morgan State all-black choir and the Harlem Boys Choir to sing the music that the Clef Club sang way back in 1912. They didn't have a choir. They themselves played the banjos and the fiddles and sang. And here is the piece. It's a march written by James Reese Europe, who was a critical figure in the history of Black pride. Critical figure. It's I don't want to go into it. It's very marvelous. His awareness, as was Cook's awareness of who they were, and so anyway, this march opened up the concert at Carnegie Hall in 1912, and I'm proud for you to hear. Black music, huh? What's black about this? Nothing. It's straight Susan. Until they sing and play piano. The review said there was a piano solo, ragtime.
responses to that from Ellie and Marcus, as you wish. To this question, the broad question of appropriation and how we might think about it. What's a productive way to think about it?
I wondered if I could maybe take an interesting perspective on the appropriation and appreciation question and tie it into this event, specifically with the New York Philharmonic and their framing of the New World Symphony. So for me, what could mess up our question of appropriation versus appreciation is the kind of presence-absence that is used when putting on Dvorak's music. For example, the New World Initiative. The president of the New York Philharmonic says, "I can think of no better way for the New York Philharmonic to help mark this milestone than through the New World Initiative, which celebrates our connection to this iconic work and its central idea of home." And if we just take off the table the idea that home was not really ascribed to it until later, and in any case, maybe the New World Symphony kind of deconstructs what is home. I mean, we had Dvorak coming from Bohemia, and then we had the concert hall created by a Scotsman, the Negro inflected melody. So, I mean, we're already unsettling the question of home in that sense. But what does the New York Philharmonic hope to gain or achieve by framing this work as their celebratory 175th kind of crucial piece? Are they, I mean, it's wholly touted as an ethical and sympathetic orchestration of cultural exchange, which I think we pretty much agree on. It's a metaphorical welcome mat for cultures otherwise excluded from the Western classical concert hall tradition. So perhaps they wish to promote some narrative that African Americans have always been influential to classical music. And this would be supported by the October 13th, 2015 panel, assessing the influence of great African American classical artists, with Eric Owens in conversation with Carol J. Oja at Harvard. What about the New York Philharmonic's ties to other African American or minority composers? William Grant Still could be one. There's no real need to highlight the New World Symphony. It's only been 124 years since it was premiered, so it's not a milestone anniversary. Of course, we are celebrating Dvorak's 175th. And then the question of, well, we didn't want to do Beethoven's Fifth, which was one of the central pieces to the very first program of the New York Philharmonic. It's overdone, so we want to do something else. Well, Dvorak's New World is just as overdone, so I don't know if we can take that as an excuse. And then there's the New York Times article from 2014 on the role of race in programming Black composers, that the influence of African Americans on the orchestral tradition is represented more often by Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue than William Grant Still's Afro-American Symphony. So this is me at my perhaps most pessimistic. So is using this symphony as a framework for the 175th anniversary correlated to educational outreach trend paralleling the anxiety of dealing with the market collapse of 2008 and the kind of colonization, if I want to use that very derogatory word, of minority buying power? Is educational outreach a way of cultivating an audience, of harnessing minority buying power, or of cultural diplomacy? So Blacks are excluded from the classical music spheres, seemingly, except for their metonymic inclusion into symphonies and folk operas. So there's this kind of idea that we're diverse people because we're programming music that uses these voices and has these musics. Of course, we're diverse, but at the same time, we don't need to turn our attention to actual Black bodies and musicians, performers, those kinds of things.